other big story we've been covering today comes from Israel, the Israel-Gaza border to be precise. WION has been covering the developments there. Our West Asia Bureau Chief Daniele Pagani is stationed in Ramallah. As Daniele was filing a report from the clash-torn area, he came under a hail of rubber bullets from the Israeli security authorities. Undeterred by the commotion, he kept reporting, and this is the last report that he sent us this evening.
The first day of general strike called by Palestinian authorities here in the city of Ramallah. Israeli forces are currently charging the Palestinians protesting. Daniele Pagani from Ramallah for WION.
You could have told
Charging the Palestinians protesting. Daniele Pagani from Ramallah for WION. Called by Palestinian authorities here in the city of Ramallah. Israeli forces are...
And Daniele Pagani joining us live. Daniele, my first question, are you okay?
Yes, of course I am. I am now back to Jerusalem from the day spent in Ramallah covering the general strike called from all Palestinian political parties. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I am.
What about the situation on the ground? This happened in Ramallah. We've seen images from Gaza of the protests and the fire and the people coming under fire from the Israeli side. Is Ramallah equally bad?
No, there is absolutely no order back anywhere. Also, we are expecting things to turn pretty ugly here in Jerusalem. In front of the Damascus gate, there was a high security. The security forces of Israel were requesting all the people to clear the exit of the Damascus gate, which means they expected after the evening prayer something could happen. It was a day of anger throughout the Palestinian territories in Ramallah. There was a general strike. It was not only Ramallah, it was in the entire West Bank, and all Palestinians, shopkeepers closed their shops today and answered massively to the call for a strike. There were clashes everywhere, also coming back from Ramallah to Jerusalem. All the checkpoints were very similar to conflict zones. I would say scores of Palestinians were fighting against Israeli security forces, and the Israeli forces were responding with live ammunition, rubber bullets, and massive use of tear gas.
Well, many demanding accountability from Israel. The UK, for one, has asked for an investigation into this violence and the death of 58 people, 2,000 injured in the Gaza protests. But looking at how things have played out in the past in similar cases, would you say that they're just going through the motions, the symbolic protests, and then life goes on as usual?
I don't think that Israel will be held accountable for what it's doing. The narrative that Israel is taking is that they did drop leaflets above Gaza. They did request to all the Palestinians not to try to get to the borders, not to try to cross checkpoints. And after these, they kind of decided to respond, considering Palestinians who did not abide by their request as combating enemies. So we have never seen in the past Israel being held accountable for what they have done. This time, especially what happened yesterday in Gaza, I think it's perhaps one of the hardest moments. It's the deadliest moment that happened to Palestinians after the 2014. That was bombing Gaza, that was Israel bombing Gaza, so that was a conflict. This was, I would say, rather asymmetrical conflict, if we can call it a conflict. But no, I do not see the international community standing up and trying to at least hold Israel accountable for what the army did, which is shooting live ammunition against protesters who were mostly using slings and stones. So it was really an asymmetrical and perhaps a disproportionate use of force against Palestinians that we saw yesterday.
It always has been, and the Israeli side saying that they're acting in self-defense, that these are not peaceful protests. When the other side fires at them, they have to fire back. Having said that, would you say that today saw relatively lesser violence? Yesterday, we saw the death of 58 people.
Yes, I would say that today it was less of a bloodshed, so to say. I wouldn't say there is less violence. Remember, Ramadan is approaching, and on Friday it will be perhaps the most problematic day. There is a lot of anger among Palestinians in the Palestinian streets. Anger is palpable. No one was keeping the shop open today. Ramallah streets were almost kind of a desert zone. Everyone responded. Everyone was present in the demonstrations, from kids to elder people. It was hugely answered a call for strike and for resistance against what they perceive indiscriminate violence committed by Israeli security forces, and also against the move of the United States Embassy. Palestinians do consider themselves offended twice, because the move of the embassy happened on the day when they mourn the Nakba, which is what they call the catastrophe, the moment when they were kicked out of their own territories from Israeli forces.
Right, still a developing story. Daniele, stay safe, and thanks very much for bringing us all those reports from the ground. Fresh protests broke out at the Gaza-Israel border following the killing of 58 people during yesterday's clashes. Tuesday marked eruption of a fresh round of violence, and there are reports that an 8-month-old baby has died in the tear gas shelling by Israeli authorities. The Palestinians buried those who died in yesterday's clashes. The protest followed the United States shifting its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Israel on Monday. Both Germany and the UK have called for an independent investigation into the Gaza violence. America's ally in the region, Saudi Arabia, has rejected its decision to move the embassy to the holy city of Jerusalem, also a disputed city. The bloodshed has triggered sharp criticism from leaders across the world, many calling it a massacre. France and Britain have urged both sides to show restraint. The White House, though, pinned the blame entirely on Gaza's ruling Hamas group, describing Israel's actions as actions of self-defense in the interest of the country's border and people. The UN Security Council is meeting to discuss this Gaza violence. The meeting follows a request from Kuwait to discuss the killing of 58 Palestinians by Israeli gunfire amid mass protests. Donald Trump's move to shift the embassy comes after his December recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Turkish President Mr. Erdogan has called the actions of the Israeli forces a genocide and Israel as quote-unquote a terrorist state. Israel, in contrast, regards the entire city of Jerusalem, including the eastern part of the city that it captured in 1967 in the Middle East War, as its indivisible territory.
Now behind me you can see Palestinians protesting close to the Beiti Hill. This is where the Israeli military headquarters in the West Bank is located. Clashes have started. It is not too bad a situation as of now, but the people's number is increasing, and Israeli soldiers descended the hills and they are preparing for tougher moments during the day. What we are seeing today is a protest for what happened in Gaza, where nearly 60 Palestinians were killed by Israeli security forces, and Palestinians are protesting against what they believe is a massacre, and also against the silence of the international community, and they are also protesting for the relocation of the United States Embassy from the internationally recognized capital city of Israel, Tel Aviv, to the wholly contested city of Jerusalem, which Palestinians also consider their capital city. Daniele Pagani from Ramallah for WION.
The United Nations, meanwhile, has taken note of the violence in Gaza. The UN Human Rights Commissioner appeared before the media and criticized Israel for the violence, and they're debating and discussing this as we speak.
In Gaza is once again guilty of inciting its people. For the past months, it has encouraged the Palestinian residents of Gaza to turn the so-called peaceful protests, there is nothing peaceful about those protests, into violent clashes. That is exactly what they have done. Rioters have thrown Molotov cocktails, planted explosive devices, and rolled burning tires. They have sent flaming materials over the fence into Israel, and they have tried on multiple occasions to break down the fence and infiltrate Israeli territory. This past Friday, Hamas led a mob to set fire to the Kerem Shalom crossing. The mob destroyed a large part of this terminal, which is one of the major checkpoints for outside goods to enter Gaza. Whatever the donor countries want to bring into Gaza, it goes through Kerem Shalom. This image is footage from the fire at Kerem Shalom. Take a long, hard look at it and understand this. Had the rioters broken the fence yesterday and infiltrated Israel, there can be no doubt that the damage to Israeli towns, kibbutzim, and villages would have looked exactly like this. Hamas has committed war crimes not only against Israeli civilians, but also against the Palestinians. It continues to exploit even the youngest Palestinian children as human shields. While the world is quick to condemn Israel for simply defending our people from danger, it does not seem to concerned about the double war crime of which Hamas is guilty. Hamas's first war crime is against my people, terrorists, incitement. A recent report revealed that if the fence between Israel and Gaza is destroyed, heavily armed Hamas terrorists are instructed to enter Israeli territory under cover of the mob and carry out attacks and kidnap Israeli civilians. Hamas's second war crime is against its own people, turning them into human shields for their own cynical gain. Every casualty that has resulted from the recent violence is a victim of Hamas's war crimes. They are solely the responsibility of Hamas. That is why everyone who claims that the US embassy move is to blame for Palestinians' violence needs to look at the facts. The excuse, it's an excuse. The excuse of the embassy is just the latest in the series of Palestinian excuses for violence against Israel. As we have said before and will say again, every country in the world has the right to defend itself. In faced with terror attacks or terror groups, it is time the international community accepted that fact and turned its attention toward Hamas.